Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table that morning? Maybe because she preferred it that way. Petty Officer Emma Thompson had learned long ago that silence was her armor, and invisibility her greatest weapon. She walked into the crowded mess hall at Naval Station Mayport just after 700 hours. The smell of coffee, powdered eggs, and fresh bread filled the air, a strangely comforting scent for someone who'd spent half her adult life in places where even the air smelled like danger. Her boots made soft, rhythmic sounds on the polished floor as she crossed the room, eyes scanning automatically, instinctively exits, choke points, corners, reflections on glass surfaces. It wasn't paranoia. It was training, muscle memory, the kind that never leaves you. To anyone watching, she looked like any other sailor starting her day. Navy blues, short brown hair tucked neatly under her cap, the kind of face that blended into a crowd, calm, average, unremarkable. That's what the Navy liked about her. That's what the SEALs loved about her. She took her tray, nodding politely to the kitchen staff as they served her breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, sausage. Simple, predictable, the kind of meal that gave you just enough energy to keep your thoughts moving and your emotions under control. She smiled faintly when a young cook made a light-hearted comment about the weather. She responded softly, then walked toward an empty table near the back. She always chose corners, not because she was antisocial, but because they offered visibility. Two walls behind her, everything else in view. That was how she'd learned to survive, in places where being careless even once could mean never waking up again. The hum of conversation filled the hall: laughter, utensils clinking, snippets of gossip. Around her, hundreds of sailors were talking about duty rotations, upcoming leave, last night's game. No one knew what she'd done 2 years earlier in the Horn of Africa. No one would ever know. She'd been taught to disappear, in crowds, in records, even in memory. But that morning, 5 new recruits decided to make her visible. They sat just 2 tables over, their uniforms still stiff and new, their hair freshly trimmed, their voices louder than they should have been. Eager, proud, a little arrogant, that dangerous mix that comes from just finishing basic training and believing the world now owed you respect. Emma noticed them long before they noticed her. She always noticed everything. "Look at her," one of them, tall, broad-shouldered, a southern accent, said just loud enough for her to hear. "Thinks she's tough just 'cause she wears the uniform." The others laughed. That specific kind of laughter, not cruel yet, but heading that way. Emma didn't look up. She cut her sausage, took a slow bite, and listened. "These women," another voice joined in, higher, younger. "They think they can do everything we can. It's ridiculous." Someone else snickered. "Someone should remind her where she belongs." The words didn't sting. Not anymore. She'd heard worse from enemy soldiers in other languages, from teammates who didn't believe she'd make it through Bud S, even from herself on nights when the doubts got too loud. Still, a small ache rippled somewhere deep. Not pain, just tiredness. The kind that comes from fighting the same war over and over, even in places that were supposed to be safe. She looked down at her food, pretending not to hear. The less attention, the better. But arrogance feeds on silence. The tallest one, she'd later learn his name was Tyler Jackson, pushed his tray aside and stood. His friends followed, 5 shadows moving toward her like a small, careless storm. Their confidence was almost painful to watch, the kind that comes from never being truly tested. Emma didn't move. She lifted her cup of coffee, took a sip, and placed it down. The cup clicked softly against the tray. A small sound, but in her world, small sounds were signals. It was the sound of a mind preparing for control. "Hey," Tyler said, standing across from her table. "You should apologize for taking a man's job. Maybe transfer somewhere more suitable." The room began to quiet, as if everyone sensed a shift they couldn't yet define. Forks paused midair. Conversations trailed off. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow. Emma finally looked up. Her eyes were calm, brown, steady, unreadable. She studied the 5 faces surrounding her, cocky, confident, a mix of amusement and ignorance. They weren't bad men, just untested, and tests had consequences. "I'm not interested in having this conversation," she said softly. "You should walk away." Something in her tone made two of them hesitate, but Tyler smirked, leaning forward on the table. "We're not done talking. You need to show some respect." Respect. The word hung in the air like a challenge. She'd heard it before, shouted by instructors on cold California beaches, whispered by officers who didn't believe she belonged in their ranks, and once by a man whose last word before dying had been exactly that. Respect. It wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned quietly, painfully, sometimes at great cost. Emma placed her fork down gently and rose to her feet. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture or threaten. She just stood. The movement was deliberate, precise, her body language saying everything her mouth didn't. "Last chance," she said. "Walk away." But Tyler laughed. "There are 5 of us," he said, "and 1 of you." Emma's heartbeat slowed. That familiar, controlled calm, the same one that came seconds before breaching a door in a hostile compound or stepping into a black sea under moonlight. Her body shifted subtly, weight distributed, breathing leveled, awareness expanding. No one noticed it, but any special operator would have recognized it instantly. The quiet click of instinct preparing for violence. What they didn't know was that Emma Thompson wasn't just another logistics petty officer. She was a Navy SEAL. 20 months ago, she'd finished one of the most grueling training pipelines in the world. Weeks of cold water, sleep deprivation, hallucinations, pain, loss, and breaking points. She hadn't just survived Hell Week. She learned to live inside it. She buried 2 friends before she ever got her trident. She'd been deployed twice, once under classified orders, and had seen what happens when arrogance meets chaos. And yet here she was, surrounded by 5 boys who thought this was about gender. She didn't want to hurt them. She just wanted them to stop. But sometimes, people don't listen until the world goes silent. Tyler's hand hit the table. "I said we're not done." Emma's eyes flicked briefly toward his wrist, strong, reckless, already tense. She could feel the room watching. She could almost hear the adrenaline rising in the air. Her pulse slowed further. 3 feet to her right, one of the recruits shifted his stance, left foot forward, an amateur's fighting position. Another was whispering something nervous. The 4th looked uncertain. The 5th, Kevin, she'd noticed his hesitation earlier, was stepping back slightly. There was doubt in his eyes. Good. At least one of them could still think. But then one of them, Carlos, reached out, a hand grabbing for her uniform sleeve. It happened in less than a breath. She seized his wrist, pivoted, and drove her elbow into his solar plexus. The sound was small, like air leaving a balloon, but the impact sent him folding instantly, gasping for breath. Before the others could react, she pulled him in, spun his weight, and used him as a barrier. 3 seconds, one threat neutralized. The next came charging Anthony, all noise and motion. She saw his shoulder move before his brain caught up. She pivoted again, swept his legs clean, and let his own momentum do the work. The crash of his body against a table echoed through the room. Dishes shattered. Conversations died completely. 5 seconds, 2 down. Someone shouted, she didn't register who. Brandon, the largest, came forward swinging wild, angry, unthinking. She sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and executed a perfect hip throw. He hit the floor flat on his back, the air blasting from his lungs. She followed through, calm, precise, measured as if rehearsed, because it was. 17 seconds, 4 down. Tyler lunged last, desperate now, all his earlier bravado gone. Emma caught his arm, twisted, and guided him down to the floor, face first, control hold locked before he could even shout. 22 seconds. And then silence. Hundreds of sailors stood frozen. The sound of one spoon falling somewhere in the distance was the only thing that moved the air. The mess hall had turned into a stage of disbelief. 5 recruits groaning on the floor, one woman standing still in the middle, breathing steady. She didn't gloat. She didn't speak. She just looked down at her hands for a moment, as if quietly reminding herself that she hadn't wanted this. That sometimes control means knowing exactly when to stop. A chief finally broke the silence. What the hell just happened? But Emma didn't answer. She turned her gaze to Kevin, the one who hadn't thrown a punch. He stood there, trembling slightly, hands half raised, eyes full of guilt. "You still have time," she said softly. "Walk away before arrogance costs you something you can't get back." It wasn't a threat. It was advice, the kind given by people who have seen what losing looks like. Security was on its way, but the damage, or the lesson, was already done. Videos were already being recorded. Within hours, millions would see it. But none of them would see what Emma felt in that moment, the exhaustion of a woman who had to prove, again, what shouldn't need proving. As she stood there, surrounded by silence, memories flooded in icy surf, screaming instructors, a voice in the dark whispering, "You'll never make it." And then another voice, her own, whispering back, "Watch me." The mess hall noise began to return in scattered fragments, whispers, murmurs, disbelief. But in her mind everything was still, still and heavy. Because she knew what would come next: questions, reports, investigations, maybe exposure. Her cover wasn't built for this kind of attention. But then again, neither was she. She'd been trained to disappear, not to become a symbol. Still, something inside her felt quiet pride, not in the fight, but in the restraint. 5 men down, 0 permanent injuries, 22 seconds, and a lesson she hadn't planned to teach. As she waited for the officers to arrive, she reached for her coffee again. It had gone cold. She took a slow sip anyway, steady, unbothered, controlled. Somewhere inside, a memory surfaced, her SEAL instructor's voice during Hell Week. "Discipline isn't about what you can do. It's about what you don't have to." She looked around the room, the fear, the respect, the confusion, and then lowered her gaze. Sometimes silence said more than words. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. What happens after silence? Usually chaos. The mess hall was still frozen in disbelief when Chief Rodriguez stepped forward, a seasoned sailor with 20 years behind his eyes and the slow, deliberate movements of a man who'd seen almost everything. Almost. "Petty Officer Thompson," he said quietly, voice cutting through the murmurs. "We need to talk." Emma turned toward him, posture straight, expression calm. There was no triumph on her face, no arrogance. Just stillness, the kind that unnerved people who expected guilt or fear. "Yes, Chief," she replied evenly. Behind her, the 5 recruits were slowly pulling themselves off the floor. Tyler's pride hurt more than his shoulder. Carlos was still wheezing, his ego collapsing with every breath. Anthony leaned against a table, limping. Brandon's eyes darted between Emma and the chief, disbelief hardening into something closer to shame. Kevin, the one who hadn't fought, looked like he wanted to vanish. "Medical on the way," the chief said, nodding toward the fallen recruits. "You and I are going to the Co's office. Now." Emma didn't resist. She simply picked up her tray, carried it to the disposal line, and set it down neatly, as though 20 seconds of chaos hadn't just changed her entire life. The eyes followed her, hundreds of them, whispering, speculating, filming. Some saw a hero, some saw a threat. Most didn't know what they'd just witnessed. And that was exactly the problem. As she followed Chief Rodriguez out of the mess hall, the sunlight pouring through the windows hit her face, bright, clean, indifferent. Outside, the base looked the same. Orderly, structured, normal, but in her gut she knew normal was over. They walked in silence through the corridors, the chief's boots echoing slightly ahead of hers. He didn't ask questions yet. He didn't need to. Finally, when the door to the commanding officer's office came into view, He spoke quietly, but with weight. Those weren't Navy standard takedowns, Thompson. Emma didn't answer. I've seen Marines brawl, SEALs fight, MPs break up riots. But that, he looked at her, his expression unreadable. That was precision, control. You dropped 4 men in under 30 seconds and didn't even lose your composure. Emma met his gaze, calm but cautious. I reacted to an immediate threat, Chief. He gave a small nod, half acknowledging, half testing. Sure you did, but I've been in the Navy long enough to know when someone's trained for more than reaction. Before she could respond, the CO's door opened. Inside, the commanding officer, Captain Marks, sat behind a wide oak desk. Late 50s, broad frame, gray hair cropped short. He didn't look up immediately, just tapped a pen against the report in front of him. Close the door, he said. Emma obeyed. Rodriguez stood beside her, silent but observant. Petty officer, Marks began without preamble, you've just been involved in a physical altercation with 5 junior sailors. They're being treated for minor injuries. You're not under arrest yet, but you're going to tell me exactly what happened. Emma stood at attention. Yes, sir. And she did clinically, factually, without embellishment. 5 recruits approached, used threatening language, 1 made physical contact. She neutralized the threat with minimal force. Her tone was steady, her words exact. When she finished, the captain leaned back, studying her. Minimal force, he repeated, tapping the pen again. You disabled 5 men in less than half a minute, one of them still seeing stars. Yes, sir. The captain's brow furrowed. Where'd you learn to move like that, Thompson? The question lingered like smoke. Emma hesitated, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she knew exactly what not to. Her official record listed her as a logistics specialist with advanced hand-to-hand certification, but the techniques she'd used weren't listed in any Navy combat manual. I had additional defensive training, sir, she said carefully. The captain's eyes narrowed. From where? Before she could respond, Rodriguez stepped forward. Sir, if I may, those moves were special ops level. I've seen SEALs use similar methods during joint exercises. The captain's gaze sharpened. Is that right, Petty Officer Thompson? Emma's silence answered for her. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Marks exhaled slowly and set down his pen. I don't know what you're involved in or why you're hiding it, but this incident is going viral. The footage is already online. Headquarters is calling within the hour. He paused, voice lowering. If there's something I need to know, now's the time. Emma's throat tightened. There it was, the line she'd hoped never to cross. She could protect her cover, or she could tell the truth and protect her integrity. For years, she'd balanced between both. Today, the balance cracked. Sir, she began quietly, I completed additional classified training under SOCOM authority 18 months ago. The captain's jaw flexed, meaning. I'm attached to a special operations unit operating under restricted designation. The specifics are need to know. Rodriguez blinked, then looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. You're a SEAL. The captain didn't confirm, didn't deny, just studied her face. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Finally he spoke, understood. His tone softened slightly. You handled yourself with restraint. No fatalities, no permanent injuries, but the optics, he sighed. This could become political. Emma nodded. I understand, sir. Good. You're temporarily restricted from active duty until we sort this out. Chief Rodriguez will escort you to your quarters. Yes, sir. As she turned to leave, Marks added quietly, You may have just changed more than you realize, Thompson. She paused at the door but didn't answer. Outside, the sunlight seemed harsher. The walk back to her quarters felt longer than usual. Rodriguez didn't say anything for most of it until they reached the end of the corridor. So it's true, he said finally, you're one of them. Emma didn't confirm, but she didn't deny either. "You could have told me," he said softly. "Would have made this easier." Emma looked at him, tired eyes, calm voice. "I wasn't supposed to be here, Chief. Not like this. My file says logistics for a reason." He nodded slowly, understanding more than she said. Still, those kids had it coming. Her expression didn't change. "No one ever has it coming. They were stupid, not evil. The system failed them before I even got to that table." He gave her a look of respect, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need words. "You know, people are calling you a hero already." Emma shook her head. "Heroes don't break cover in a cafeteria." Then she walked away. That night the base was restless. Screens glowed in barracks and offices, replaying the same 20-second video over and over, shaky phone footage showing a lone woman dismantling 5 recruits with impossible precision. Online, comments exploded. "She's a legend. No way that's real. Women like her make the Navy proud. She should be punished." The world had opinions. The internet had judgments. Emma had neither. In her small quarters, she sat alone on the edge of her bunk, staring at her hands. The same hands that had once pulled a wounded teammate from under fire in Mogadishu. The same hands that had ended a man's life in a dark corridor because there been no choice. The same hands that now trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of everything she tried to keep buried. Her reflection in the window looked like a stranger, the face of someone who could disappear in a crowd but couldn't escape herself. She thought of the recruits, the fear in Kevin's eyes, the shock in Tyler's. She didn't hate them. She pitied them. Because once she'd been them, young, overconfident, convinced that the world was simple, until it was. The clock on her wall ticked softly. 23:47 hours. Outside, floodlights hummed across the tarmac. Somewhere, a helicopter lifted off, its distant thrum reminding her of another time, another place. Flashback Kandahar, 3 years earlier. Rain pelting down on a dirt runway. She was kneeling beside a wounded Marine, holding pressure on a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. The air smelled of metal and mud. Her team leader, Lieutenant Cross, shouted through the storm, "We're leaving in 30 seconds." She looked up, eyes burning with exhaustion. "He's not ready for transport." Cross stared back, then nodded once. "You stay, we'll cover." That night she learned what it meant to be alone, really alone. She got the Marine stabilized, dragged him to an extraction point, and held off 3 hostiles with only a sidearm and a fatting radio battery. When they found her 8 hours later, she was unconscious, soaked in blood, most of it not her own. That was the night her instructors stopped doubting her, and the night she stopped needing anyone's approval. The memory faded. The room was quiet again. Her comm device buzzed, a secure message from a contact she hadn't heard from in months. The line read only, "HQ aware, maintain silence, await orders." She stared at the words for a long time before locking the screen. Orders, always orders. But something in her chest whispered that this time the mission was different. This time she wasn't fighting a war in the desert or the jungle. This time the battlefield was perception. She lay back on her bunk, eyes on the ceiling. Somewhere outside, a storm was rolling in, distant thunder rumbling like artillery on the horizon. And as lightning flickered across her window, she whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "They think strength is about power. It's not, it's about control." Her eyes closed. For the first time in a long while she didn't dream of war. But she dreamed of silence and the cost of keeping it. How fast can a secret die in the digital age? Faster than the truth can catch up. By morning, the footage had spread beyond the base. News networks blurred faces but replayed the moment again and again. 5 recruits lunging, 1 woman moving like a ghost through chaos. They slowed it down, circled her frame in red, added captions like "unidentified female officer." Commentators argued about gender, discipline, training. but no one talked about what she'd actually done: remain in control. Control didn't go viral, violence did. Emma sat in her quarters, watching the muted television flicker through headlines she never wanted to exist. Navy mess hall incident: female sailor overpowers 5 men. Questions raised about secret training programs. Unconfirmed reports suggest special operations involvement. Her name hadn't been leaked yet, not officially, but her face had. Someone had captured her from the side, a profile shot that looked eerily calm in the chaos. The media froze it, replayed it, dissected it. They didn't see exhaustion or restraint or moral weight. They saw spectacle. And spectacle was dangerous. At 700 the knock came, sharp, measured. She already knew who it was before opening the door. "Captain Marks wants you in the operations wing," Chief Rodriguez said quietly. "Now." Emma nodded, buttoning her uniform top. The hallways buzzed with low conversation, people trying not to stare as she passed. Respect, curiosity, fear. It was all the same look. When she entered the operations office, the mood changed instantly. 2 men in suits stood near the window. Government, not Navy. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't need to. "Petty Officer Thompson," one said, voice clipped, efficient. "We're here on behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command. Sit." She sat. Captain Marks was already there, hands folded, expression heavy. "You're officially being placed on administrative hold pending an internal review. These gentlemen will brief you." The man on the left spoke. "Your classified service record is compromised. We can't confirm how yet, but the video triggered automated alerts through internal systems. We're initiating containment protocols." Containment. It was the word they used when secrets got too close to sunlight. Emma said nothing. The other man continued. "Until further notice, you're to remain on base, limited contact, no press, no off-base communication. We'll provide updates through command channels." Marks cleared his throat. "There's more." He slid a folder across the desk. "The recruits involved have filed statements. They're not pressing charges. In fact," he looked at her, "they're apologizing." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Apologizing?" Rodriguez nodded. "They've been reassigned to disciplinary training. The one named Kevin, he's been asking to speak to you." Emma exhaled slowly. "What for?" "He says he owes you an apology in person. Says you taught him something about respect." She looked away. That lesson wasn't supposed to hurt anyone. The man in the suit adjusted his tie. "It didn't, but it might still cost you your anonymity. The video's been picked up by congressional channels. There's interest in confirming whether the Navy employs active female SEALs." Her jaw tightened. "And you're asking if I want to deny it?" "We're asking if you're capable of it," he replied. For a long moment, she didn't move. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Finally, she said, "If you need me to disappear again, I can." The man gave a faint, humorless smile. "Disappearing isn't the issue anymore, petty officer. The problem is people have already seen you." That night, as the sun sank over Mayport, Emma sat by the docks, the same place she used to clear her head after long deployments. The sky bled orange into gray, waves slapping gently against steel hulls. She watched the horizon. The sea always looked calm from shore. It lied beautifully. Her reflection shimmered in the water, not as a seal, not as a sailor, just as a woman caught between duty and consequence. Behind her, footsteps approached, slow, hesitant. "Petty officer." She turned. Kevin stood a few feet away, nervous but resolute. His uniform looked newly pressed, as if that could hide the shame in his posture. "Chief Rodriguez said you'd be here," he began awkwardly. Emma nodded. "You wanted to talk?" "Yes, ma'am," he swallowed. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for what we did, for what I didn't stop." She studied him, the uncertainty in his voice, the sincerity trembling under it. Why are you apologizing to me? Because you didn't have to do what you did, he said. You could have hurt us worse, but you didn't. Emma's gaze drifted back to the horizon. You think that matters? Yes, he said firmly, it does. She smiled faintly, a small crack in her composure. You're learning fast. Kevin hesitated. Ma'am, I looked you up. I know there's nothing public about you, but I know what I saw. You moved like, he trailed off, like someone who's seen real things. Emma turned to face him fully. Her voice softened. What you saw wasn't strength, Kevin. It was control. Strength loses its meaning if you can't control it. He nodded slowly, absorbing the words like something sacred. I'll remember that. Good, she said. Then something useful came out of that morning. He hesitated again. Do you regret it? Her eyes lingered on the ocean. The water shifted, reflecting light like broken glass. I regret that people think a fight is what proves worth. I regret that it takes violence for others to listen. But do I regret defending myself? She looked at him. Never. Kevin stood there for a moment longer, unsure what to say. Then he saluted sharp, awkward, genuine. Thank you, ma'am. As he walked away, Emma felt something she hadn't in a while, a quiet ache of hope. Later that week, the chaos reached Washington. Behind closed doors, admirals, politicians, and defense analysts debated her name. Some wanted to celebrate her proof of progress. Others wanted to bury her proof of controversy. To them, she was Emma Thompson anymore. She was the incident, a symbol, a headline. Back on base, she was still confined. Orders were orders. But inside her room, the silence felt heavier now. It wasn't peace, it was limbo. She picked up a letter from her locker, the one she'd written years ago but never sent. The edges were frayed, the handwriting smudged. It was addressed to no one in particular. If I ever stop being invisible, it won't be because I wanted to be seen. It'll be because I had no choice. And if that happens, I just hope people remember that silence isn't weakness. It's discipline. She folded it again, placed it back inside. That night she dreamt of water again, the cold Pacific during Bud S., the roar of waves swallowing her body, her instructor's voice echoing across the surf. Pain is temporary, purpose is permanent. She repeated that in her head until it became a mantra. Now, years later, she wasn't sure she still believed it. When she woke, the base was still dark. A storm had rolled in, wind howling through the cracks in her window. She stood and poured herself a cup of coffee, staring out into the rain. The reflection of lightning illuminated her face for a split second, calm but tired. The door buzzed. A message light flickered on her console. Report to command at 800, immediate. The briefing room was full when she arrived. The suits from earlier were there, Captain Marks and two new faces, one civilian, one admiral. The atmosphere was thick with formality. Petty Officer Thompson, the admiral began. As of this morning, your identity has been classified under a new designation. You are to be officially recognized as part of an advanced tactical training program. No reference to SEAL operations will be confirmed or denied. In other words, the civilian added, you're now both real and unreal. The Navy acknowledges your existence but denies your purpose. Emma nodded slightly, and the video. Still spreading, Mark said, but we're controlling the narrative. You'll be cited for exemplary restraint under provocation. The civilian's voice lowered. You've become a symbol, petty officer, whether you like it or not. Emma's jaw tightened. I'm not a symbol, I'm a soldier. Sometimes, the admiral said quietly, they're the same thing. That evening, as the sun returned after the storm, Emma stood once more by the docks. The wind was calmer now, the air carrying that sharp salt scent of renewal. Rodriguez joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one over. Looks like they're making you a ghost with medals now. She gave a small smile. It's better than being a ghost without them. He chuckled. Then, after a pause, they say the footage changed Navy policy. More support for women in combat training, more funding, you did that. She shook her head. I didn't do it for that. I know, but sometimes change doesn't care about motive, it just needs a face. She stared at the horizon again, the endless line between sea and sky. Faces fade, she said softly. Principles shouldn't. Rodriguez nodded, sipping his coffee. You think you'll ever go back to the teams? Emma's eyes softened. Maybe, but right now I think I need to learn how to stand still. He smiled faintly. Standing still isn't your thing. No, she said, her gaze distant. But maybe it should be. The last of the sunlight dipped below the horizon, casting the ocean in silver. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the waves said everything words couldn't. Sometimes strength isn't in the fight. It's in surviving what comes after. And sometimes the people we underestimate the most are the ones who teach us what dignity really looks like. How long can a person live between two worlds, one where they exist and one where they're erased? For Petty Officer Emma Thompson, it had been 12 days since the incident. 12 days since the mess hall went silent, since the world decided to turn her restraint into a legend she never wanted. She spent her mornings running the base perimeter before sunrise, the only time the air felt clean enough to think. The same 5-mile circuit, same rhythm of boots against pavement. The ocean wind bit at her face, the salt sharp, grounding. In that isolation, she could almost forget that outside those gates, her name was being whispered by strangers she'd never meet. The woman who beat 5 men. The first Navy SEAL they never told us about. Proof that strength has no gender. Headlines blurred truth with fantasy. They called her the Silent Storm. They called her Navy's ghost. But Emma knew what she really was, just a soldier who wanted peace and got attention instead. By the second week, the interviews began. Not hers, the recruits. The same young men who once saw her as a target were now giving statements on camera, their rehearsed words shaped by command. Tyler Jackson, the ringleader, sat before reporters, posture stiff. She didn't provoke us, he said, eyes down. We acted without thinking. I respect her. I learned something that day. Carlos followed, still pale from humiliation but trying to sound brave. She could have hurt us bad. She didn't. That says more about her than it does about us. The world ate it up. Forgiveness made good TV. Redemption made better ratings. And while everyone argued online about equality, Emma sat in a quiet debriefing room, watching her life being dissected through a 2-inch layer of glass. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years learning how to disappear, only to be exposed for doing the right thing. That afternoon, as rain began to fall outside, a message arrived through her secure line. Request presence, Office 4C Priority Alpha, CMDR, Lewis. Her pulse quickened at the name. Commander Jacob Lewis, her former co from Team 9, the man who had signed off her last classified deployment, the man who had seen her at her worst and still said, she belongs here. She hadn't spoken to him since she'd been pulled into deep cover. The hallway outside 4C was quiet. No guards, no cameras, too clean for coincidence. She entered, saluted, and waited. Lewis stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the gray coastline. His hair had more silver now. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. Sit down, Thompson. She obeyed. For a moment, he said nothing, just studied her, as though comparing the woman in front of him with the soldier he remembered. You made quite a mess, he said finally. Emma's tone stayed level. Unintentionally, sir. He gave a small smile, the kind that meant he wasn't angry, just disappointed at the world. You always did have a habit of breaking things quietly. Sir, if you're here to reprimand me. I'm not, he interrupted. I'm here because the higher-ups want to use you. Her eyes narrowed. Use me. Lewis turned from the window. You've become a symbol, and symbols have value. The Pentagon's forming a public outreach initiative to show diversity in special operations. They want your story to lead it. She felt her stomach tighten. My story isn't for sale, sir. They're not asking, he said softly. They're giving you an option, cooperate and control the narrative, or they'll build their own without you. Emma stared at the floor. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the space between them. You think that's justice? I think it's politics, he replied, and politics doesn't care about justice. He handed her a folder, thin, classified markings across the cover. What's this? She asked. An alternative, Lewis said. Off-book assignment, quiet, clean, no cameras, no speeches, you disappear again. She hesitated before opening it. Inside, an operation file stamped with Operation TIDLOCK. A covert retrieval mission, a high-risk extraction near the Red Sea. Intel, she asked. Lewis nodded. Humanitarian cover, but make no mistake, it's combat adjacent. A downed reconnaissance drone, sensitive data on board, the kind of thing we don't want falling into anyone's hands. She closed the folder. You're offering me a way out. I'm offering you a choice, he said. Go back to being a ghost or stay here and become a headline. Emma leaned back, the weight of it settling over her like armor. And what do you think I should do? Lewis met her eyes. You've already proven who you are. Now decide what that means. That night she couldn't sleep. The rain tapped against her window like Morse code, steady and relentless. She sat on her bunk, staring at the folder. Operation TIDLOCK. Her body ached to move, to do something. Action had always been easier than thought, but this wasn't about missions anymore. This was about identity. Was she still the soldier who dove into the unknown without hesitation? Or had she become someone else, someone who wanted quiet, who feared what the next fight might take from her? Her reflection in the glass looked tired, older. She wasn't the same woman who'd survived Bud S. She was someone forged from silence and consequence. And yet something inside her stirred. That familiar pull, not adrenaline, not ego, duty. Not to the Navy, not to command, but to the voice that had carried her through cold oceans and darker nights. Purpose is permanent. Morning came gray and heavy. She went for her run again, but halfway through, she stopped near the waterline. The sea was restless, wind chopping across the surface. That's when she heard footsteps behind her. It was Rodriguez holding 2 coffees. You're up early again. Couldn't sleep. He handed her a cup. You never do when you're deciding something. She smirked faintly. You sound like Lewis. He called me, Rodriguez said, told me about the assignment. Emma's expression didn't change. Of course he did. He also said it's dangerous, low visibility, no backup. That's how I started. Rodriguez studied her face. You sure you want to go back after all this? She looked out toward the horizon, waves crashing against the pier. I don't know what I want, but I know who I am. And who's that? She exhaled slowly. Someone who doesn't hide behind mistakes, hers or anyone else. He nodded, quiet pride behind his eyes. Then go do what you do best. Just come back this time. Emma turned toward him. If I don't, tell them one thing. What's that? That silence isn't surrender, it's choice. 2 days later, she was gone. No announcement, no orders logged in the system. Her name vanished from the Mayport roster like ink dissolving in water. To the world, Petty Officer Emma Thompson faded again into rumor. To the few who knew her, she became something rarer, a reminder. Rodriguez found a single note left behind in her locker. Don't let the noise make you forget what matters. Respect isn't shouted, it's earned quietly. He folded it carefully and tucked it into his breast pocket. 3 weeks passed. Somewhere in the Middle East, in a dust-blown airfield under a bleeding sunset, A figure stepped off a transport plane, helmet under one arm, duffel over the other. Emma. Her eyes squinted against the heat. The local commander met her with a nod, no questions. Glad you're here. Heard you're the one they call the Silent Storm. She smiled faintly. You shouldn't believe everything you hear. He chuckled. Guess I'll see for myself. She didn't answer, because she knew that names didn't matter. Missions didn't matter. What mattered was how you carried yourself in the seconds that tested you, whether that was in a battlefield or a cafeteria. As she walked toward the waiting convoy, the sun caught her face. For a brief second, her expression softened, almost peaceful. Because she finally understood something she hadn't before. You can't erase who you are to make others comfortable. You can only choose what parts of yourself the world gets to see. And for Emma Thompson, that choice was everything. Far away at Naval Station Mayport, Chief Rodriguez stood on the same pier where she'd once trained. The ocean wind whipped at his uniform. He pulled the folded note from his pocket, the ink slightly faded now, but the words still sharp. He whispered them under his breath, eyes on the horizon. Respect isn't shouted, it's earned quietly. He smiled faintly, as if answering someone only he could hear. Then he turned back toward the base, knowing she was out there somewhere, unseen, unheard, unstoppable. Sometimes the world learns from noise, but real change always begins in silence. And sometimes the quietest warriors are the ones who leave the loudest echoes. This chapter opens with her new covert assignment, Operation Tidlock, in a foreign land. The focus, tension, realism, emotional introspection, and the quiet humanity behind precision. Tone, cinematic, atmospheric, restrained. Think Zero Dark 30 meets The Hurt Locker. Soundtrack cue. Muted percussion, desert wind, heartbeat tempo under stillness. Cinematic narrative, Part 5, 1,500 plus words. The desert doesn't hide secrets, it buries them. 3 weeks into Operation Tidlock, Petty Officer Emma Thompson had learned that again, the hard way. The heat clung to her skin like guilt. The landscape stretched endless, sand, rock, silence. Out here, everything looked the same, which was exactly why the mission existed. Somewhere within 50 miles of nothing was a wrecked U.S. reconnaissance drone. Inside it, encrypted data so sensitive that it could rewrite alliances if found by the wrong hands. Her team, a small, unmarked 5-person detachment, operated under civilian cover. Humanitarian engineers working with local search units. No flags, no insignia, no backup. At night they camped under the sound of generators and distant wind. During the day they searched, methodical, patient, relentless. But Emma wasn't the same woman who'd left Mayport. Something inside her was quieter now, not calmer, just heavier. She'd spent years mastering detachment. Now every decision felt personal, every silence loaded. Got movement bearing 185, whispered Corporal Jensen, her comms tech, through the headset. His voice was calm but taut. Emma crouched behind a dune, raising her binoculars. Through the heat shimmer, 3 pickup trucks crawled across the sand, armed locals, likely scavengers or something worse. She exhaled slowly. They're not searchers, look at the formation. Militia. Maybe, she said, or opportunists. Either way, we can't let them near the wreck. The team's linguist, Farah, adjusted her scarf, nervous but ready. We can intercept before they reach Sector 9. Emma nodded. Minimal engagement. We don't exist here, remember that. She stood, sand slipping under her boots, rifle slung low. As they moved across the dunes, the air thickened with static tension, the kind that pressed on the skin before a storm. Every mission starts as numbers, grid coordinates, call signs, time windows. But eventually it becomes faces, choices, consequences. And this one was about to. They reached the ridge just as the truck slowed below. 5 men stepped out, weapons casual but eyes sharp. Their body language screamed confidence, the kind that came from never being caught. Emma gave hand signals, Jensen to flank right, Farah to cover translation if needed, the others to hold. Then she descended the slope, alone. The leader spotted her first, older, grizzled, amused by the sight of one unarmed woman approaching through the glare. He shouted something in Arabic. Farah translated softly over the comm. He says you're lost, and brave or stupid. Emma stopped 10 feet away, palms visible. Her voice carried easily in the still air. I'm not lost, but you're about to be. The man laughed, then said something crude that made Farah wince. Emma's eyes didn't change. She waited until the laughter faded, then took a slow step closer. You're trespassing on U.S. property, she said. Walk away. He grinned, lifted his rifle, and gestured to his men. It happened fast. 2 shots cracked through the air, warning rounds that kicked sand near her boots. The next second, the silence exploded. Jensen's suppressed rifle snapped once. One of the gunmen dropped, leg shot. Emma moved low, fast, deliberate, closing the distance before the leader could adjust aim. She hit him center mass with a precise strike, swept his rifle away, pivoted, and used his momentum to throw him into the sand. Another turned his weapon toward her, too late. 2 more controlled bursts. 4 seconds. The last man froze, hands raised. Farah's voice trembled through the mic. They're down, 2 alive. Emma exhaled. Secure them, check for comm devices, move fast. As her team converged, she knelt beside the leader, winded but conscious. His eyes flicked from her to the sky, disbelief settling in. You're not supposed to be here, he rasped. Emma stared at him, expression unreadable. Neither are you. She stood, signaled her team, and they vanished back into the dunes. By dusk, the wreck site appeared half buried in sand, smoke-stained metal glinting faintly. The drone. Emma crouched beside it, running her gloved hand over the hull. Heat radiated from the metal even after days in the open. Inside, a small black data core was wedged deep within the frame, cracked but intact. She extracted it carefully, sealing it in a thermal case. Got it, she said. Jensen gave a relieved exhale. Finally, home in one piece. She didn't answer immediately. The desert wind carried something distant, faint, rhythmic, metallic. Helicopter blades. But not theirs. Her instincts flared, everyone down. They hit the sand as a black helicopter crested the horizon, unmarked, fast, scanning with floodlights. Hostile or local, Jensen shouted. Emma watched the shape, the pattern of movement, the angle of descent. Not standard U.S. approach, not rescue. She swore under her breath, they're hunting the same wreck. Orders. Scatter, lose heat signatures. Rendezvous at fallback delta in 30. The desert turned alive with movement, silent figures breaking in opposite directions, vanishing like shadows into the dunes. Emma sprinted low, the case clutched tight. The sound of the rotor grew louder, the air itself vibrating. For a moment, the beam of light brushed across her shoulder. She froze, breath shallow, heart steady. Then it passed. She waited 10 more seconds before moving again. By the time the helicopter landed, she was gone. An hour later, under cover of darkness, the team regrouped at Delta, a shallow canyon carved by centuries of wind. Everyone made it dusty, exhausted but alive. Who the hell were those guys? Jensen muttered. Could be private contractors, Farah said. Or worse, mercenaries paid to recover what we were sent for. Emma placed the sealed case on the ground. The faint hum inside told her the core was still active. She looked up at her team, dirt-streaked faces illuminated by the glow of a single lantern. Mission not over. We move to extraction at dawn. No signals, no transmissions. They can't trace what they can't hear. Farah nodded, eyes wide. And if they find us first? Emma paused, then said quietly, "Then we make sure they regret it." That night, while the others slept in shifts, Emma sat awake, back against a rock wall. The stars stretched endless overhead, cold and brilliant. She turned the data core over in her hands, the faint vibration humming through the casing. It wasn't just tech. It was information, thousands of hours of surveillance, coded communications, perhaps names. The kind of data that could save or ruin lives. She thought about all the people who would never see these deserts, who'd never understand what it cost to keep them safe. And she thought about Mayport, about Rodriguez, about the recruits, about that mess hall that started all this. Funny how small things spiral. One moment of control can echo across continents. At dawn, the team prepared for extraction. The horizon glowed faint pink, shadows stretching long. They moved in silence, crossing ridgelines toward the coordinates Lewis had sent. Then halfway there, movement again. Farah froze, pointing ahead. A lone figure stood on a distant dune, watching them. Through her scope, Emma saw it, a man, military stance, holding a satellite receiver. Her blood went cold. "He's tracking transmissions," she whispered. "They've got our frequency." Jensen swore. "We turned everything off." "Except the beacon and the data core," she said. "It's active." Farah's face paled. "They planted a trace." Emma's mind worked fast. If she destroyed the core, the mission failed. If she didn't, they'd be hunted until they were dead. "Give me the case," she said. Jensen handed it over, eyes questioning. She set it on a rock, pulled a multi-tool from her belt and cracked open the housing. The hum grew louder. Inside, a small transmitter blinked red, barely visible beneath the encryption lattice. She held it up between her fingers, heart steady, pulse calm. "Now they can't follow," she murmured, crushing it under her boot. Then softly, almost to herself, "Sometimes control means letting go." By noon, they reached extraction. The transport drone came in low, silent, its shadow gliding across the sand like a ghost. One by one, the team boarded. Emma was last. She took a final look at the desert, endless, golden, indifferent. And for the first time in years, she felt something like peace. Not because the mission was over, but because, for once, she'd chosen it. As the drone lifted off, the horizon blurred behind heat shimmer. The desert shrank, then vanished. Jensen leaned over. "What now, Chief?" She smiled faintly, eyes on the sky. "Now we go home, whatever that means." Far away, on a distant monitor in a command center, Commander Lewis watched the live feed flicker with static, then clear. The retrieval was confirmed. He leaned back, exhaled, and muttered to himself, "You did it again, Emma." But he knew this wasn't the end. Not for her. Not for anyone who lived in the space between secrecy and sacrifice. Because once you've been a ghost, once you've seen the world from behind the curtain, you never really come back. You just learn how to walk among the living again. Sometimes the mission isn't about the target. It's about remembering who you are when no one's watching. And for Emma Thompson, that memory was the only thing she'd never let them take. Home didn't look the same anymore. When Emma's transport landed at Norfolk under low gray skies, the air smelled of salt and jet fuel, familiar but distant. She stepped off the ramp with her duffel over her shoulder, uniform stripped of insignia, hair tied back tight. No one saluted. No one stared. That was the point. Ghosts didn't get ceremonies. A black SUV waited near the hangar. Commander Lewis stood beside it, hands in pockets, rain beading on his jacket. "You made good time," he said as she approached. "Minimal resistance," Emma replied. "Package secured." He nodded once, signaling her into the car. Inside, silence stretched between them, the kind of silence only soldiers understand, the aftermath kind. Finally, he spoke. "You did what was needed. The data core's already being analyzed." She stared out the window, watching the base lights blur by. You said it contained comm records. It did. And he hesitated. Let's just say it wasn't all foreign intelligence. Her eyes shifted toward him, meaning. Lewis's jaw flexed, meaning there were domestic leaks, someone inside the network. Someone high-level, higher than either of us. The words sat heavy in the air. Emma turned back to the window, her reflection pale against the dark glass. So all that, the desert, the chase, the near extraction, it wasn't just about recovering what was lost. It was about covering what shouldn't exist. Lewis didn't answer. He didn't need to. 2 hours later, they pulled into a nondescript facility outside Washington. No signs, no flags, just gray walls and men with no name tags. Inside, an analyst handed Lewis a briefcase. Full decryption ongoing. Partial content flagged under internal review. Meaning classified? Emma asked. The analyst glanced at her, then at Lewis, unsure how much she was cleared to know. Lewis gave a small nod. She's read in. The analyst swallowed, then continued. One of the comm logs contained encrypted files referencing Mayport Station. Specifically, internal personnel assessments dated prior to the mess hall incident. Emma frowned. My name. Yours and a few others. It looks like someone was tracking behavioral metrics of classified officers without authorization. She blinked, processing, tracking us. Yes, ma'am. Psychological patterns, routine deviations, interpersonal analysis, all tied to a private contractor database. Emma felt something twist deep in her chest, that subtle mix of anger and disappointment she thought she'd buried years ago. You mean to tell me someone's been profiling active covert personnel, she said, while we were out risking our lives? The analyst didn't respond. Lewis's tone was low. That's what we're trying to confirm, but the data suggests your incident wasn't an accident, Emma. You were being monitored before it happened. Her eyes hardened. You think someone wanted me exposed? Maybe not you specifically, he said. Maybe what you represent. That night she didn't sleep. Her quarters overlooked the Potomac, the kind of sterile hotel room reserved for people in transit between lives. She stood by the window, hands on the glass, watching raindrops chase each other down the pane. If what Lewis said was true, then her cover hadn't broken by mistake. It had been fractured carefully, deliberately. She thought about the footage, the way it spread so fast as if waiting to. And then she thought of the recruits, Tyler, Kevin, the others. Kids who'd made one mistake and paid for it with a lifetime of headlines. What if they were part of it too? Unwitting pawns in someone else's experiment. The idea made her stomach turn. For years, she'd believed that honor lived in silence. That service meant trusting the system even when it broke you. But tonight, for the first time, she wondered if the system had been quietly studying its soldiers like test subjects, measuring their breaking points, turning humanity into data. Her reflection stared back at her, calm, expressionless, almost robotic. For the first time, she didn't recognize herself. In the morning, she requested permission to review the decrypted data. It took 6 hours of clearance protocols, but Lewis eventually gave in. The file was dense, streams of metadata, psychological reports, biometric scans. Each entry tagged with identifiers like THOMPSONE09B and timestamps from years prior. She scrolled until she found a familiar reference. Behavioral stress simulation, outcome, controlled escalation under social provocation. Her breath caught. It was the mess hall. Someone had predicted it. She leaned closer to the screen. The report continued. Subject likely to exhibit restraint until physically provoked. Expected response window, 20-25 seconds. Controlled dominance probable. Her pulse spiked. They hadn't just known it might happen, they'd modeled it. A whisper escaped her lips. They used me. Lewis entered the room just then, seeing her expression. Emma. She turned toward him, fury trembling under composure. You knew. His voice was calm but tired. Not until now. You knew someone was watching us. You knew they were analyzing us like lab rats. Not me, he said quietly. But yes, someone did. High-level oversight authorized a covert behavioral study on special operations integration. They wanted data on how mixed units perform under stress. Her fists tightened, so the recruits were selected, not by me, not by Mayport, someone higher. She felt her chest constrict, the laughter, the provocation. The way the camera angle had been perfect, it all clicked. That wasn't random, she whispered. They engineered the entire thing. Lewis met her eyes, guilt-heavy behind his calm. Emma, you weren't supposed to find out. Silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating. Finally, she said, you used me to sell a policy, to prove something about gender, about control, about optics. He didn't deny it. Her voice cracked, barely audible. Do you have any idea what it's like to survive Hell Week, combat, isolation, only to realize you were a case study in someone's experiment? Lewis looked away. You changed the conversation, Emma. You inspired thousands. I didn't want to inspire anyone, she said, voice breaking. I wanted to serve. There's a difference. She stepped back, shaking her head. You all talk about honor like it's measurable, but the second it becomes inconvenient, you turn it into propaganda. Emma. No, she cut in, quieter now but sharper. Don't say my name like it's yours to use. She left that night. No orders, no permission. Just walked out into the rain and kept walking until the base lights disappeared behind her. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay in a place that turned sacrifice into spectacle. Hours later, she found herself at a bus stop outside the city. Empty, quiet, forgotten. She sat on the cold bench, hood pulled up, duffel by her side. The streetlight buzzed faintly above her, a lonely hum that matched the rhythm of her heartbeat. Across the road, a group of young sailors laughed as they passed, their uniforms crisp, their eyes bright. She watched them, felt something between envy and sorrow. They still believed in the clean version of service, the kind without shadows. She didn't blame them. Once she did too. Sometime after midnight, her phone buzzed an encrypted signal. Lewis again. She ignored it at first. Then curiosity, or maybe conscience, made her answer. Emma, his voice came strained. They're closing the study. All data deleted. You won't be mentioned again. She laughed, bitter, small. You think that's what I wanted? I think it's what you needed, he said softly. You can walk away now, you're free. Free, she repeated. I was never free, none of us were. A long pause, then, where will you go? She looked out at the empty street. Anywhere they aren't watching. Then she hung up. The bus arrived minutes later. She boarded, took a window seat near the back. The driver didn't ask questions. The city lights faded behind her, distant reflections on wet asphalt. As the road stretched ahead, her thoughts blurred between exhaustion and clarity. Maybe this was how it ended, not with fanfare or medals, but with quiet distance. Maybe the only real victory was reclaiming her anonymity. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that it wasn't over. Not yet, because truth doesn't disappear just because someone deletes it. And if the Navy's system could manipulate one incident for narrative, how many others had been staged? How many stories like hers were buried under silence? She didn't know yet, but she knew she couldn't walk away from that question. Outside, the first light of dawn began to creep across the horizon. The rain had stopped. The sky was pale and clean, like something waiting to be rewritten. Emma watched it through the window, eyes half closed, the ghost of a tired smile forming. Sometimes the fight isn't about who's right. Sometimes it's about who refuses to look away. And as the bus carried her into the unknown, one truth settled deep in her chest, heavy, real, unshakable. She had spent her whole life following orders. Now, for the first time, she was following her conscience. Sometimes silence is loyalty. Sometimes it's survival. And sometimes it's rebellion. What happens when a soldier without orders keeps moving? She becomes her own mission. It had been 6 weeks since Emma vanished from official records. 6 weeks since she'd walked away from the facility, the lies, the polite betrayals disguised as commendations. She lived now in motion, small towns, bus routes, motels that smelled of bleach and dust. She used cash, burned phones, spoke little. Each morning she ran before sunrise, her body remembering discipline even when her mind tried to forget. But ghosts never rest. They linger not in places but in people. Every news headline, every online rumor about the unknown Navy operative felt like a reflection of the secret she couldn't kill. Some articles praised her. Others questioned if she ever existed at all. Both felt wrong. She wasn't a myth, she was a consequence. One evening, in a diner off Highway 41, she sat in a corner booth with a black coffee and a cheap notepad. The waitress refilled her cup twice without asking. The rain outside hammered against the windows, rhythmic, isolating. Her notepad was full of fragments, names, places, unanswered questions. Behavioral study, SECNAV oversight. Private contractor link. Who authorized Mayport surveillance? Every arrow led back to the same term she'd found buried in the decrypted files. Project Haven. She didn't know what it meant, not yet, but it appeared in connection with multiple bases, personnel records, and internal evaluations. It wasn't a study, it was a pattern. She flipped the page and wrote 2 words in capital letters, WHOBENEFITD. The bell above the diner door chimed. Emma didn't look up right away, but her instincts sharpened. 2 men entered, civilian clothes, clean haircuts, 2 deliberate in posture. They took a booth by the window, ordered nothing. One glanced her way. Her pulse slowed, not panic, just awareness. Old training whispered in her mind. Observe, assess, plan, exit. She slipped her notepad into her jacket, stood casually, dropped a few bills on the counter, and walked toward the restroom. The moment she turned the corner, she pushed open the emergency exit, stepped into the alley, and disappeared into the rain. By the time the men realized she was gone, she was already 2 blocks away, blending with the gray. She took refuge that night in an abandoned storage facility near the train tracks. A broken cot, a leaking roof, but silence, and that was enough. Her reflection in a shard of mirror looked rougher now, sunburned, gaunt, older, but her eyes were still sharp. She opened her notepad again, circled the words Project Haven, and beneath it wrote a single line. If they studied me, who else did they study? The idea kept her awake. Somewhere out there, other operatives, men and women, could be walking through the same invisible maze, unaware they were part of a psychological experiment disguised as command evaluation. She couldn't expose it alone. She didn't even know who to trust. So she decided to start small, find proof. And she knew exactly who to call. The next morning, she bought a burner phone from a gas station and dialed a number she'd memorized years ago, but never thought she'd use again. 3 rings, then a cautious male voice answered. Rodriguez. She exhaled, a sound that felt heavier than words. Hey, Chief. A pause, then, Emma. Yeah. He didn't sound angry, just relieved. Where the hell have you been? Off the radar, on purpose. Lewis has been looking for you, so has NCIS. They think you've gone rogue. She almost laughed. I didn't go rogue, I just stopped pretending the system's clean. Emma, his voice softened. You know how deep this goes. I'm starting to, she said, and I need help quietly. He hesitated. You know you're putting me in a bad spot. I wouldn't ask if I had another option. Silence, then, what do you need? Access. Internal contractor records linked to behavioral studies under a term called Project Haven. It's connected to Mayport, maybe other installations. He exhaled slowly. That's dangerous territory. So was Bud S., she said. That made him chuckle quietly. You haven't changed. Yes, I have, she replied softly. That's why I'm calling. Another pause, then, give me 72 hours, I'll find something. Thank you, Chief. You still trust me. She smiled faintly. You're the only one who didn't try to rewrite my story. Then stay alive long enough to hear what I find. 3 days later, the call came. She answered before the first ring finished. I found something, Rodriguez said, voice tense. You were right, Project Haven isn't a behavioral study. It's a predictive algorithm. What kind? One built to assess psychological stability under pressure. They've been feeding it live scenario data from covert operators for years, including yours. Emma's grip tightened on the phone. For what purpose? Recruitment and attrition modeling, he said. They're trying to design the perfect operator, one who doesn't question orders, doesn't break cover, doesn't feel guilt. You weren't a subject, Emma. You were a baseline. Her breath caught. Baseline. They needed someone with exceptional restraint, moral control. You were the variable they couldn't replicate. So they tested reactions around you, recruits, peers, even commanding officers. Her voice trembled with disbelief. So that confrontation in the mess hall was the final trigger event, he said grimly. They wanted data on real-time moral restraint. They didn't expect you to handle it without casualties. Emma went silent for a long moment. Rain pattered faintly against the roof above her. Finally, she said, "Send me everything." I can't, he replied. It's too deep. Even pulling this much left a trace. Someone's already noticed. Then burn it, she said. Delete everything you saw. He hesitated. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, she whispered. But someone built a machine to measure humanity and forgot what it feels like. That night she left the storage unit and walked through the city streets, aimless but burning with purpose. For the first time in months she wasn't running, she was hunting. She thought about all the names she'd trained beside, people who trusted their commanders, who gave everything without question. How many of them had been studied? How many lives were just lines of code in a simulation of loyalty? The thought made her sick. She stopped at a bridge overlooking the water, the wind sharp and cold. Below, city lights reflected like scattered stars. For a brief moment, she imagined letting it all go, throwing the phone, the notes, the ghosts into the river and walking away forever. But she couldn't. Not while silence still protected the wrong people. At dawn, she took a train north, destination unlisted. Somewhere between stations, she drafted an encrypted message on a secure device. The recipient, an anonymous investigative journalist known for exposing classified corruption. Her message was short. I have evidence of a covert program targeting active-duty operators. It's bigger than it looks. I'll prove it, but I need you to listen before you publish. She hesitated before sending. It went against everything she'd been trained to do. But maybe, just maybe, some truths were worth the risk. When the train stopped in D.C., she melted into the crowd, just another face in a sea of mourning commuters. 2 nights later, she sat in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Arlington, a baseball cap low over her face. Across from her sat the journalist, mid-40s, sharp eyes, careful posture. You're Thompson, he asked. Used to be. You understand what happens if you're lying. Do you? She countered. He gave a faint smile. Fair point. You said Project Haven. That name popped up in defense contracting reports before, mostly blacked out. Because it's not research, she said. It's a blueprint. He leaned forward. A blueprint for what? She looked him dead in the eye. A future where soldiers don't think, don't feel, don't question, just obey. He exhaled, stunned by the certainty in her tone. You can prove that. She slid a drive across the table, enough to start. He picked it up carefully as though it might explode. If this is real. It is, she said, and it's going to make people very nervous. The silence between them stretched, electric, dangerous. Then she stood. Publish what you find, but keep one thing out. What's that? My name. She left without looking back. Outside, the air was cold, the sky streaked with early dawn. She walked until the streets emptied, until the city sounds faded into nothing but her footsteps. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Somewhere else, servers hummed, lines of code rewriting history. And she realized something she hadn't before. She couldn't undo what she'd become, but she could decide what it meant. That night, as she camped on the outskirts of the city, her phone buzzed once, a single message from an unknown number. They know you talked, run. She stared at it for a moment, then smiled faintly. Not fear, clarity. She deleted the message, dropped the phone into the dirt, and crushed it beneath her boot. The stars above were cold and endless. The same stars that had watched her crawl through mud, through surf, through every lie that called itself duty. She whispered to the night, to no one and everyone at once. You can't program conscience. Then she started walking. Sometimes loyalty isn't obedience. Sometimes it's defiance in silence. And sometimes, the truest soldiers are the ones the system tries hardest to erase. What happens when the truth finally comes out? Nothing at first. Then everything. It began with a leak. 2 weeks after Emma disappeared again, the journalist published his piece, not with drama or fanfare, but with precision. The headline was simple. Project Haven, the Navy's hidden experiment on human conscience. The article spread like wildfire. It didn't name her, just referenced an anonymous operative who had unintentionally exposed the classified program through an event at a Florida naval station. It described predictive modeling, data manipulation, covert stress simulations, and a government project built to engineer obedience. The story broke the world open. For a moment, people didn't know who to believe. Officials denied everything. Commanders issued carefully worded statements. Analysts debated ethics on late-night panels. And somewhere in the noise, the truth Emma had carried in silence finally began to breathe. In a safe house north of the city, Emma watched it unfold through an old laptop. The room was dark except for the flicker of the screen. She wasn't proud, she wasn't even relieved, just tired. The journalist had kept his word. Her name was absent, but people guessed anyway. They pieced together old footage, slowed it down, compared facial features, built theories. She had become a myth again, a symbol for everything good and everything broken about the system. And yet in the quiet hum of that dim room, she felt none of it. Only the stillness that comes after a storm, the kind that feels like peace but smells like smoke. A knock broke the silence. 3 soft raps, the kind used by someone who didn't want to be heard. She reached for her sidearm instinctively, then froze when a familiar voice came from behind the door. Emma, it's me. Rodriguez. She opened the door slowly. He stood there in plain clothes, eyes tired, face drawn. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly. Neither should you. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him. You saw it. She nodded, every word. They're panicking. Pentagon, SOCOM, everyone. They don't know what to admit to. Emma sat back on the edge of the bed. They'll bury it. They always do. Maybe not this time, he said. There's too much attention. Congress is calling for hearings. Contractors are lawyering up. Someone's going to take the fall. She looked at him, calm, weary. And you think it'll be me? He shook his head. No, you're already a ghost. Then why are you here? He hesitated before answering, because ghosts still deserve to be seen. They sat in silence for a while. The hum of the old refrigerator filled the air like a heartbeat. Rodriguez took a small envelope from his jacket and placed it on the table. "Lewis sent this, said you'd understand." She opened it carefully. Inside was a single piece of paper, official Navy letterhead, unsigned. Petty Officer Emma Thompson, service record expunged by order of Special Operations Command. All commendations reinstated. Classification closed. She read it twice before looking up. "They're wiping me clean." "Officially," he said. "Unofficially, you're a legend now." She laughed quietly, a sound between disbelief and exhaustion. "Legends don't pay rent, Chief." He smiled faintly. "No, but they change things. The Navy's implementing oversight reforms. No more unauthorized studies. You did that." She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I didn't do it for them." "I know." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "You could come back, you know, reinstate, different capacity, training maybe." She shook her head. "I've given them enough of me." He paused. "So what now?" Emma looked at him, her voice soft but steady. "Now I stop being who they made me." He nodded slowly, understanding the weight in her tone. "Where will you go?" She smiled faintly. "Wherever the noise doesn't reach." 2 weeks later, she was gone again. No trace, no forwarding address, just an empty safe house and an old, turned-off laptop left behind on the table. But the ripples of what she'd done didn't stop. Across the country, hearings began. Journalists dug deeper. The military issued statements about ethical recalibration and review of human performance programs. They never said her name. But everyone knew. Some called her a whistleblower. Some called her a traitor. Others, the ones who understood silence, called her something else. A soldier who stayed loyal to the truth when everyone else served convenience. Months passed. Somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, a small coastal town woke each dawn to mist and sea spray. Locals spoke of a quiet woman who rented a cabin by the cliffs. She kept to herself, ran every morning, helped fishermen fix nets, and spent hours sitting by the rocks watching the waves crash below. She never talked about her past. But sometimes, when the wind picked up, she'd look toward the horizon with a look only soldiers wore, the kind that mixed peace with memory. She didn't miss the noise, she didn't miss the uniform, she missed the purpose. And sometimes, when the tide rolled in, she'd think about those 22 seconds in a mess hall that had changed everything. Not because of the fight, but because of what it revealed, the quiet line between strength and restraint. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ocean, she sat on the cliffs with a cup of coffee. The sky was painted in gold and violet, the kind of beauty that hurt to look at. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded note, yellowed and creased. It was the one she'd written long ago in that sterile Navy barracks. "If I ever stop being invisible, it won't be because I wanted to be seen. It'll be because I had no choice." She smiled softly, reading it one last time. Then she folded it again, weighed it with a stone, and tossed it into the sea. The waves swallowed it without sound. "Good," she whispered, "stay gone." A week later, Rodriguez received a letter handwritten, no return address, sealed in plain paper. He opened it slowly, heart already knowing who it was from. "Chief, you once told me the Navy teaches us to follow orders, but no one teaches us what to do when the order is silence. I used to think silence was survival. Now I know it's a weapon, one you can use to protect or to hide. I've spent years learning to be invisible. Maybe it's time I learn how to live instead. Tell them I'm fine. Tell them I forgive them, but not because they deserve it. Because carrying anger is just another form of obedience." Reti. Rodriguez folded the letter carefully, eyes wet but proud. "Damn it, kid," he whispered. "You finally got free." Months later, in a Senate hearing, a nervous young officer testified under oath that Project Haven had been authorized without proper oversight. The name Emma Thompson was never spoken, but everyone in the room knew the ghost that haunted the discussion. By then, the world had moved on, as it always does. But somewhere in that quiet coastal town, a woman walked along the shore at sunrise, her boots leaving light prints in the sand. The seagulls circled above, the waves crashed in rhythm, the wind tugged at her hair. She paused, looking out over the horizon, eyes calm. She wasn't a seal. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't a victim. She was simply whole. And in that still moment, the world felt wide again. A soft voiceover might have said it like this: sometimes the fight isn't about winning or losing. It's about staying human when the world around you forgets how. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The camera would fade to the ocean, infinite, untamed, free. A lone figure walks into the mist, leaving only footprints. And then even those are gone. The end.